Do-It-Yourself Junkie here with another weight loss video blog. It's now week 4 and I am down to 287.4 pounds, which is a BMI of 35. That's roughly 17 pounds lost since I've started. For this week I met my calorie goals each day. Every day I met my water goal of 100 ounces a day. I also met my 10,000 steps a day goal. But for my sleep, I've come up short once again. I didn't meet my goal on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday. And then I probably didn't meet it Wednesday, but my activity tracker was not on my arm. It was getting charged that day. As far as my 2019 challenge, I've so far made 124.9 miles out of 110. Now, last video I talked some about paleo versus keto, and in this video I'm going to go over paleo a little bit more in depth. And the way I'm going to attack that is the arguments that I've heard against paleo. The first argument is that we have no idea what Paleolithic people ate back during that time period. And then it also says that we're ignoring the 75 million years that occurred before that. And if we haven't adapted from paleo to our current diet, then there's no possible way that the apes could have adapted from their diet of fruits, vegetables, and some nuts to the paleo diet in that 75 million years that occurred before the paleo period. And they also like to point out that artery plaque that is found in us with our high meat diets isn't something that are found in animals that are specifically designed to eat meat. In other words, carnivores such as dogs, cats don't develop plaque in their arteries from an all-meat diet, and that it impacts only herbivores. So their argument is we shouldn't be eating this meat-based diet and we should all become vegetarian. And you can kind of understand who is mainly making this argument. Counter to that is, while plaque does not really affect most carnivores, it has been found in dogs primarily. And there's a couple different breeds such as Labradors, Dobermans, and Poodles that definitely have signs of plaque in their arteries even though they're carnivores. So that argument about the animals that have evolved to eat meat-only diets don't develop plaque is false. And I'm kind of wondering, I don't know if there's research that backs this up. I thought I had read it once before, but when I went back and tried to look it up, I wasn't able to find it on the internet. I could have sworn that meat-heavy diets and animals, they'll develop plaque only if they consume carbs. And I could have sworn I had found that somewhere, but when I was researching it this time around, I couldn't find it. It just seemed to disappear off the internet. Also, red meat, for years has been told that it's bad for us because it contains saturated fat, and that it's supposed to boost the LDL cholesterol, which is considered the bad cholesterol. But recent studies have started showing that the saturated fat is actually good for you. It also makes you feel full. And that it has no negative impact depending on what medical study you read. It's kind of the same thing going on with eggs. They're good for you, and then they're bad for you, and now they're good for you again. And it seems like about every week somebody's coming out with a study that shows that eggs are good for you, and the next week they're bad for you, and then the next week they're good for you. And it just kind of shows like how unstable the science behind all this is. And it almost seems like depending on what the person wants out of the study, that's the results they're going to get. Now, what raises LDLs and also lowers HDL, which is the good cholesterol, is trans fats. So that is what you should be focusing on avoiding, is those trans fats. You find these in processed meats, such as bacon and lunch meats, which are high in nitrates and sodium. And these are definitely proven to increase that artery plaque that you don't want building up in your body. And this is one reason that I argue that bacon shouldn't be part of paleo and should be avoided, because it's the process of making the bacon, the nitrates and the sugars going in to cure that bacon, that's going to lead you down an unhealthy path. And in that note, you should avoid processed foods, because that's what they contain oftentimes. And that is basically the main point of paleo, is to avoid those processed foods. Now, while it's true we don't know what they ate during the Paleolithic period, we do know fairly certain they weren't going down to the grocery store and buying ready-made products that contained a whole bunch of chemicals to keep them fresh. So in my mind, if you're going to do paleo anyway, you should focus away from the red meat. Even though it does have benefits for you, limit it, because back in the day it would have been really hard to hunt and catch that type of meat, and they more likely would have gone after easier game, which also happens to be healthier for you, and that would be fish, which are fairly easy to catch. Most fishermen would disagree, but the methods used during that time period differed from the legal methods that we use today. And also birds, which were easily just trapped or snared. Now the second argument against paleo is something that excludes whole food groups, not whole foods, but entire food groups off the food pyramid, for example, can't possibly be good for you. And their argument is paleo shouldn't be eliminating grains or milk. And they have years and years of data to back up, well, these have always been good for us. In fact, we're supposed to get like 11 to 12 servings of grains per day, and we're supposed to get 2 to 3 servings of dairy, both of which are eliminated on paleo. Paleo kind of eliminated them based on the argument that dairy and grains might not really have been available during the Paleolithic period, because they wouldn't have been real heavy into agriculture, or cattle for that matter. There's definitely an argument there. I would probably agree with them, but I mean, plants such as grains had to exist in the wild somehow. It's not something we just managed to develop out of nowhere. So, I mean, there could be an argument for eating them too, but at the same time, how we ate them probably different. I don't think we would have been grinding them up, turning them into flour. We probably would have been eating them whole, kind of like nuts and berries. Dairy, that would have been a little harder for the Paleolithic person to get a hold of. But on the other side of it is, do you really want to be consuming it? I mean, there's been numerous studies that show it, other than the calcium, it's not really that great or easily digested by humans. And it contains lactose, which is a sugar. And we kind of want to stay away from sugars when doing any sort of weight loss program, even naturally occurring sugars. I'm fairly against dairy because it's what I call liquid calorie, where you get a whole bunch of calories and not necessarily filled up by them. So to that end, I mean, it could go either way. I know some people that follow paleo that do consume a little bit of dairy. And those people that do consume dairy usually go in the forms of like butters, which are really low in lactose, or hard cheeses, which are also low in lactose. And if you absolutely have to drink milk because you just crave it that much, or you're worried about the calcium, I would go for the full fat milk. And in that end, you're getting the fat, which is going to provide some fullness. But on the other side, when you drink low fat milk, well, they're pulling all the fat out, and they have to replace it with something. You just can't remove it. So they dump a whole bunch of added sugar back into it, which is definitely what you don't want. And usually people that have lactose intolerance will even kind of know they can eat those hard cheeses or butter and be okay. It's the soft cheeses, the glasses of milk, ice cream, stuff like that contains a lot of lactose that is going to give them problems. Back to the grains, the problem with today's grains is that they're processed, they're milled. Like I said, back in the day, if they were eating grains, they're probably just eating them whole. They weren't grinding them up, processing them into flour. The reason that's different is because the milling process is what strips out the fiber, the part that you want out of the grain. If they were to stick it in their teeth, they'd grind it up, but the fiber's still there and they're still ingesting it. If you grind it into a flour, you're stripping that fiber off of it, and then you're intaking just the flour when you eat that, and the fiber isn't part of the grain any longer. The reason that the fiber is important is because that's what provides the health benefits. That is what lowers the risk of heart disease, and that's why there's been a push for like all these whole grain items. The only problem is these whole grain items are still milled, so they're not truly whole grain. They might have milled the whole grain, but you're still not getting the benefit of the unground grain going in your mouth and chewing it. After the milling occurs, you're left with nothing except the high carb, high calorie part of the grain with a whole lot of starch in it. And then some additional sugar is added to make the flour into bread. If you really think about it, a lot of stuff has whole grain on it. Well, interestingly enough, Fruit Loops, for example, they're considered whole grain. I don't know how anybody could consider those whole grain, and they're definitely not healthy for you. In fact, I would be surprised if any doctor said to you, yeah, make sure you go and eat your Fruit Loops every day because that's what you need. The only people that are be pushing that is the ones trying to sell the stuff to you. And then the other interesting fact is grains actually contain an anti-nutrient. And what that means is they have something in them that absorbs other nutrients. So those nutrients that you ate get absorbed into the grain rather than getting absorbed into your body and used. This blocks the digestion of them, and they just pass on right on through. These anti-nutrients are also found in legumes such as beans, peas, peanuts, which is one of the reasons why most paleo dieters avoid these items. So what happens when you take grains in, you're taking in a whole bunch of carbs, and then because you're taking in all these carbs, you're producing a whole bunch of insulin, and all that insulin is taking the grains and they're storing all that sugar that you're not using, because you don't need very much of it, as fat. And that's one of the ideas behind keto, even, is you reduce the amount of sugars that you're taking in. That forces your body to quit producing the insulin, and you switch over to the production of ketones and burning of fat. Another bad side effect is with the continuous intake of grains, you produce more and more insulin. Your body starts becoming insulin resistant with its continuous high levels of it, and the cells are bombarded with that, and they become more insulin resistant. Your pancreas starts to produce more to make up for how resistant the cells have become to it, and then it just starts a really bad cycle that continuously just raises and raises your insulin, and that's where you start seeing stuff like type 2 diabetes. One of the last arguments that a lot of people like to use is our paleo ancestors, they didn't live very long, so there's no way they saw the ill effects of their high cholesterol, high fat, high protein diets, and that since we have such longer lifespans today, we're going to just run our bodies down eating this type of junk following the paleo diet. And so their argument is like, these guys, well, of course they could eat like that. It didn't matter. They all died before age of 20 anyway. So they're saying, like, even with the bad diet, they weren't going to die off. And this bad paleo diet, in their view, is going to kill us off early. And we're going to see the bad effects of it that our Paleolithic ancestors didn't because of their short life period spans. And basically they're saying, since there's no proof that the diet is healthy because of the lack of long life due to it, then we should avoid it at all cost. Which is crazy to think about, because there's science that they're using to prove this is taught in health class. We've got the food pyramid with the grains at the bottom, and then a little bit of fruit and vegetables, and then even less of dairy and meat above that, and then like some sweets and fats up at the top. So like you should be avoiding most fats altogether. And the reason I say that is crazy because that science has only been around since 1992, really. That's when it was introduced. I mean, there was some stuff a little bit earlier than that, like a round dinner plate looking thing, which was pretty interesting because it said the dinner plate was like, hey, make sure you eat something out of each of these food groups, which is not enough to survive on it, obviously, just eating like one serving from each food group. And then it said something along the lines of like, eat more as needed. It didn't really specify like, hey, eat 12 servings of grains like the current food pyramid does. Which I've heard, I think it was Michelle Obama changed the food pyramid back to a plate, but they kind of subdivided it up and still kept a bigger than a quarter share of grains on it. And then they put like dairy off to the side in a little glass or something. It still seems inaccurate and kind of based off of just a small percentage of research. And basically this diet that they came up with was based on professional athletes and what they needed to perform at their top levels. Well, they're expending a lot of energy, like constantly training 8-10 hours a day, so they're going to need those grains because they need the energy on tap right now. Plus, none of them were pretty fat to begin with. I don't know of any professional athletes that have really started out on that diet and made the transition from overweight to Olympic athlete. But I do know of quite a few that have started like paleo or keto, made that transition down to Olympic style athlete, and then maybe brought in a whole bunch of grains to then fuel their body to continue that level of output after they had gotten down to that performance level. And it doesn't really apply to the everyday person who's not going out and just running their bodies nonstop in that manner. And it's kind of crazy that the food pyramid is still around today, especially since the carbohydrates in it have been shown to be linked to obesity. I mean, when did obesity really start to spike? When we started pushing this grain-heavy diet. And like, nobody really remembered family members suffering from type 2 diabetes even like back in the 50s and 60s. And it's all been a more recent thing, and the argument is, well, our lifestyle has become more sit all day long, work, come home, sit in front of the TV all day long, and no exercise and overeating. But really, it seems to be more diet oriented than the activity oriented. Like, yes, we're lazier today, but even back in that time period, you had people that were doing desk jobs all day long, yet there didn't seem to be this huge obesity problem that we have today. This type of change is hard. I mean, you've got kind of the mob mentality where I'm going to stay with this group of people because everybody agrees on this one thing and we have been taught that this is correct. So when you get somebody out over here that's saying like, no, we need to eat this way, these guys are going to attack them. For one, they don't want to be wrong. Two, it's hard for them to go over there and join the guy, especially when they see this whole group attacking them. It's kind of you got a single person out here saying like, oh, paleo is the way to go, or like Dr. Atkins saying, we need to change our diet to this, and everybody just kind of disowns them from the scientific community. And that right there is, you got the whole group over here. Well, maybe 2 or 3 more people in that group are like, oh, you know what, he's right. Well, they're not going to go over and join them because they just saw what happened to him by himself. And they don't want to be attacked like that and cast out of the scientific community. So they just shut their mouths and say nothing. Or they continue doing research that is biased in a way that they get the outcomes that they want to support the generally accepted ideas of the community. And I mean, they can sit there and say like, well, this one guy out here is wrong and the food pyramid's correct. That's what we've been taught. But the fact of it is, the food pyramid was introduced to try to combat heart disease. But the interesting thing is, heart disease hasn't decreased any since it was introduced. In fact, it's increased. And on top of that, we've also increased diabetes and obesity, which weren't really a problem before the food pyramid was introduced. And there has been research that links this type of diet to the increase in those two diseases. The only problem is you got the large community, and it's what's being rammed down everybody's throat in school, so it's just tossed to the side and ignored because it doesn't fit what everybody wants to accept. Hopefully this wasn't too long. Good work if you're still sticking to your New Year's resolutions, and continue to shed those pounds, and good luck. See you next week.